Okay, can I just ask you something? Is it just me, or are you seeing so much content right now about ADHD in women? I mean, everywhere. TikTok, Instagram, it is all over the place. It has been all over the place. Conversations about late diagnosis, about masking, about burnout, about perimenopause. And I've had this moment more than once where I pause and I think, wait, what is going on here? Is this just the algorithm because I am a woman in midlife? I don't know why all of this is being sent to me. Or is it something bigger happening? Because what I'm noticing, both online and in my work, is that so many incredibly capable, thoughtful, high functioning women are starting to recognize themselves in these conversations. I mean, I think for the first time for many of them. Women who never would have considered this before are now suddenly thinking, wait, could this actually apply to me? And if that's something you've ever wondered about, I want to talk about why that is, because this isn't random. And there are some very real reasons why so many women are only now beginning to understand themselves in this way. Stay with me here because this is going to be a multi-part series I'm so excited for, and I can't wait to dive into it. Welcome to the Power to Flourish podcast, where science meets the art of a beautiful life. I'm Dr. Andrea Line, positive psychologist, giftedness expert and coach, and modern-day spiritual godmother to brilliant, deep-feeling women. This isn't just another self-help podcast. It's a sanctuary, a sacred space to come back to yourself. Each week, we'll explore the emotional experience of gifted, sensitive women and what it means to live a life that feels as beautiful as it may look. Because flourishing isn't a luxury, it's your birthright. And your life is waiting. This is the Power to Flourish podcast. So I want to start a little bit personally because you know me, I love to share my personal life with you, and I hope that it just helps ground this conversation in something more than just my professional work, although of course my professional work is important, but I really do relate to this in a very real way. And I just want you to know that. So I have never been formally diagnosed with ADHD. I did not feel the need to do that, honestly, because, well, I'll tell you the whole story, but I was never in a place where I felt like I needed treatment for it. I did not choose to do that. Maybe in retrospect, that was a bad decision. I don't know. But I'm almost 50 now. I've lived my whole life this way. And I've known for a very long time that I struggle with many of the classic patterns associated with, and I did as well when I was a young girl. It also runs very strongly in my family. I mean, I don't want to call out any of my family members on this podcast, but you know who you are. It is very prevalent in my family, I would say. There are multiple people in my immediate family and extended family who have struggled with ADHD, again, whether they've been diagnosed or not. The psychologist in the family can see the patterns, if you know what I mean. So it has been something I have been aware of for, I would say, most of my adult life, certainly not when I was younger. And I remember even back in my early to mid 20s, that was when I was in graduate school. And that was when I first started learning more about ADHD and specifically how it shows up in girls. And I just remember having a very clear moment of recognition. It was like, oh, because I think up to that point, and again, this was probably around 2000, 2001, somewhere in the early 2000s, my only experience, and of course, we did not have all the things available to us now where we get all this mental health information. Like mental health information was pretty much gated unless you went to graduate school and you read all the textbooks, right? Like it wasn't just out there for everyone to read. People didn't know the DSM. Like the public didn't know what that was. So this is back in those days, a long time ago, almost 20, I guess 25 years now. But I remember having this very clear moment of recognition and just thinking, not in a horribly self-critical way, it was just enlightening. It was just this feeling of like, oh, this this like describes me. This describes a lot of what I struggled with as a child. And also looking at some of my other family members, realizing, oh, this explains a lot. So I had my own aha moment decades ago, right? Like, I don't know, almost 3 decades ago. But what is interesting is that over the years in my career as a therapist, as a school psychologist, I mean, I've worked in so many different settings. And I've worked with so many girls and teenage girls, adolescent women, and young women who were formally diagnosed. Oftentimes it was because if they were coming to see me, and especially the settings that I was working in, they had pretty challenging issues in their life, right? Like it was pretty, I would say, severe on the spectrum of things. So those girls usually, I mean, sometimes they hadn't been diagnosed yet, and I would be the person evaluating them and giving them a diagnosis, for example. But a lot of them, especially in their teen years, had been diagnosed. So actually, most of the kids, almost all of them, had an ADHD diagnosis. We can debate whether what we can. That's a whole other conversation, but just an observation. So again, ADHD was one of the most common things I saw. And for me, and I sort of lost track with this thought a minute ago. You see my ADHD brain there. I had one memory of a kid who was a few years younger than me. He was sort of a child of a family friend, and he was out of control. He was probably 6 or 7, and he was like classic, I don't know, like Dennis the Menace or something. It just very, very behaviorally out of control, hard to manage, hard for his parents to manage, emotional outburst, different things like that. And I knew that he took Ritalin or some kind of stimulant, like somehow as a young kid, I overheard that or something. And again, this is back in the 80s, very, just like less common than today, way less common. I mean, kids were diagnosed and given stimulants in the 80s for sure, but like this was the only person I knew. Now, granted, he was a family friend, so I probably knew lots of other kids who were diagnosed with ADHD, but I didn't personally know that about them. So that was basically the extent to my knowledge and personal experience with ADHD before going to graduate school. Well, I guess even before I went to graduate school, I worked in a residential treatment center with children and adolescents, and a lot of those kids also had ADHD diagnosis. So I guess I was like 19 or 20 when I started in the field, and that's when I really, started getting like a hands-on experience of that. So all of that to say, I've had the experience of understanding this from both sides, right? I see it very clearly in others. I shouldn't say it's always clear because inattention and behavioral issues and like there are a lot of things that can overlap. So I shouldn't make it sound that simple. But when you're trained, I should say that when you are trained to evaluate for these things, it becomes more clear. And so I had that professional experience and then also recognizing many of those same patterns in myself. And I think that's part of why I've been paying such close attention to what's happening right now, because something clearly is shifting. More and more women are starting to recognize themselves in this conversation. I know diagnoses have definitely spiked in recent several years. And for many of them, in my opinion, it's coming much later than it should have. And honestly, I think I've taken it for granted that I've known about this ADHD in women and girls, especially gifted women, like for decades of most of my adult life now. And I know this sounds kind of silly for me to say this, but it's true. It didn't really occur to me that there might be all these women out there who are in midlife and are just realizing this and figuring out that it explains a lot about themselves now, like in their 40s or their 30s. And it breaks my heart because while I'm so glad there's more awareness today, I could feel for a woman who has struggled. I just think about myself. What have I been struggling this whole time? And what was I attributing it to? At least I had like a narrative in my head that helped me understand myself. I just think that can be so helpful. Even though I never decided to take any medication or anything like that, it still was just helpful in my own personal narrative to understand why I struggle with things. And I can like joke around with my husband and my daughter and family. We can just joke around about it. At least I can, because again, I've lived with this for a long time. I will also say that this whole thing became even more real for me when I became a mother. And if you recall, I became a mother at the age of 19. I also look back at my very impulsive behaviors in my teen years. And while there was a lot going on and a lot of different explanations, I don't know if I've ever looked at it through the lens of ADHD, but, you know, probably a clinician would have, because I was definitely just out of control and having a real hard time um, managing that impulse control, especially at that stage of my life. It's way easier now, but anyway, that's a story. So I became a mother at 19. And then lo and behold, and not surprising, because again, this very much runs in families, I raised a daughter who, in my mind, very clearly had traits, I'll just say traits of ADHD, right? From a young age. Now, I am pretty biased. I will just say I'm biased in that unless a kid it's like very, very extreme. I think most children, like most young children, it kind of breaks my heart when like a 2 or 3-year-old is getting diagnosed with ADHD, because again, unless it's extreme, I don't find it all that helpful, because developmentally, young children, a lot of their behaviors just fit what we see. I mean, ADHD is a neurodevelopmental condition. So I know that's my personal opinion on how early. I'm sure some people will disagree with that, but especially when we start medicating them at that young age. I mean, I actually think that is, I have lots of feelings about that. So anyway, because I had this daughter and she was struggling, and I was so grateful because, again, here I am. I'm in a clinical psych program. I'm learning about all of these things. And so I just had early awareness of what it looked like, and I was able to recognize it fairly early on. And again, I didn't rush out to get her diagnosed formally and get medicated, because that again, you're hearing my personal bias, which was I did not jump to medication for me or for her. I believe, once you're older, you can make all those decisions. Your brain is developed. To me, it's like a different kind of conversation if an adult or even an older teen wants to make that decision for themselves. But for me, as a parent, I felt like I wanted to help support and manage and help her learn the skills that she needed without medication. Now, if she was on this podcast right now, she might say, "Mom, I really wish you would have, put me on medication." I don't know what she would, honestly, I don't know what she would say about my decisions. But as parents, we make the best decisions we can in the moment. And so I saw the patterns. I could understand what she was struggling with. I guess I will say, when she was in middle school, the school psychologist, we did do an evaluation, because she was really, like for most kids, once they get to middle school and the demands increase, then, and I'll get into this in other episodes about especially gifted children, they might be able to sort of mask some of the struggles early on, but then the demands increase, and the struggles with executive functioning and a lot of things that come with ADHD really start to show themselves. And so that was happening with her. But like I said, I'm just really grateful that I knew what to look for with girls and bright girls at that, because I recognize, especially now, most people, the average parent, unless they have some reason to really do a deep dive and educate themselves on this, they wouldn't necessarily know. So I was doing a deep dive on it. I literally was spending all my days learning about all of this stuff, because I was learning to be a psychologist, especially when it comes to bright, capable girls. Like I said, I'll put myself in that camp. As young girls, we often are able to compensate. Not all the time, but in many areas. So those are often the very girls that get missed. A lot of girls get missed because they're not necessarily being disruptive. They're not necessarily failing in school. They're not raising those, red flags, so to speak, in obvious ways, like many boys, young boys with ADHD. It often presents differently. So instead of being recognized and supported in some of the struggles that are just, we'll talk about what that looks like. It's nuanced. They're often just expected to keep going, to figure it out, right? Maybe try harder. And sometimes when a parent or a teacher or you name it, another adult in that child's life doesn't understand ADHD or doesn't realize this is a kid who has that, they label the child bad or, um, just try to be difficult. I've seen that a lot because they are struggling with something that the adult thinks they must know how to do. And if they're not doing it, there must be some motive, they're meaning to not do it. It can be so sad. And again, I'm really, really grateful that I understood this about my daughter and I understand it about myself. So this brings us to what I want to talk about today. Now that you know all the personal backstory, I just wanted to let you know I'm not just talking out of a textbook. I want to talk about this pattern because it's well documented. And like I said, it breaks my heart. And I want to add my 2 cents to the conversation. There's a lot of conversation happening in the world on this topic, and I just want to give you my perspective. So if that is of interest to you, let's continue on. So if you're a woman and you are in your 30s, 40s, even 50s, maybe older, or maybe you're listening in your 20s, and you have been wondering, wait, could I have ADHD? Yeah, like you're watching the TikToks, you're watching the reels, you're reading all this stuff, and things that have followed you throughout your life start to it's like things start to click together, right? It's like, oh my goodness, I had no idea. Like really, some really specific things. My sister and I joke about this all the time because suddenly it explains a lot. Now, granted, just because you have a diagnosis of ADHD or you think you might, it's not going to look exactly the same across the board. Of course not. There's different subtypes and it's also just, it's going to look different, but there are some themes. So some of the things that can come up for people, especially women, is the mental overload, like feeling like your brain is just, why does it feel so hard? The inconsistency. It's a feeling of like, I have to work so much harder than everyone else just to keep up with like basic regular things. And for a lot of women, again, not all, but a lot of women, especially gifted women, especially the women I have worked with, on the outside, at least to a certain extent, or at least to a certain point in their life, they look completely fine. They look completely fine. It's like on the top above the water, like they're swimming and their hair is like really nice and their makeup is done and they're like gliding in the water. This is the image I have. And then underneath the water, they are like paddling furiously, trying not to drown, but somehow on the outside, it's just like smooth gliding across the water. That is the image that comes to my mind anyway. So why is this happening? Why are so many smart, high-functioning, creative women finally getting recognized? And for those of them who choose to go the diagnosis route, like actually getting a formal diagnosis, do you know how many people I follow, like well-known people, especially in the online space, because especially, social media, these are the algorithm is sending me these stories. But even quieter names, people that aren't necessarily like huge, celebrities. So many women are sharing and talking about how they have recently been diagnosed or how they got diagnosed in their, mid 30s or 40s or whatever. So what is important to understand first is that this isn't rare. It's actually been documented for decades. Girls generally are diagnosed with ADHD at significantly lower rates than boys in childhood, often 2 to 3 times less frequently. And honestly, today in 2026, that number could be even more. I don't have like the latest 2026 stats on that, but historically, girls get diagnosed less frequently than boys. It's because it tends to look different, like I said, right? So girls are more likely to have what's called the inattentive presentation, which means they are not disruptive. They're not like hyperactive and running around the classroom and getting in trouble. They are not the ones getting in trouble in class, typically. They're the ones who are daydreaming, or they are quietly overwhelmed, but you would never know it. They're working very hard behind the scenes to keep up, to get those straight A's, to make honor roll, to remember to keep track of really basic things like their homework. Because of that, they are often overlooked. I mean, think about it. If you're a teacher, you know this is true, right? In an average classroom, you've got a lot of kids. The ones that are a little noisier, the ones that are a little more disruptive, right, tend to get your attention. And the ones that are sitting there quietly, unless you are a very astute teacher with the bandwidth, you may very easily overlook a girl who has ADHD. It's so common. Girls are also more likely to internalize what they're experiencing. So instead of it showing up as behavioral issues, it can show up as anxiety, overthinking, emotional intensity. And I know you're hearing some of that right now and go, wait. Didn't you say those things come with giftedness? Yes. Also. So we're going to put that on the shelf for a minute and we're going to come back to the giftedness ADHD thing at a different time. But right now, I want to just dive into what does this actually look like later in life? Now, I am not going to repeat. You could do a deep dive, especially if you want to be very entertained. I'm sure you could, search ADHD in women on TikTok or Instagram, and all sorts of videos are going to pop up with like all kinds of very specific behaviors. But I'm going to talk about them a little more generally here. So, as I said, for many women, it shows up as like chronic mental overload. Now, a lot of women would say, well, I feel that mental overload. A lot of women do feel that mental overload, but a woman with ADHD, it's sort of hard to quantify, right? Because we can't get inside of people's heads, but they are overwhelmed. Like things that another woman might be able to handle fairly well just feel so much harder, and they've got to use so many different supports to help them keep track of things. I know this is very, very true of me. Someone could look at me and say, wow, she's super, super organized, even as a child. But I was overcompensating for the fact that it just, I needed to do it that way. Like if I didn't do that way, and this is true now, like if I don't kind of overcompensate, things get lost in the shuffle. They just do. It can show up as difficulty starting and or finishing things, especially things that matter most. Again, I have a bazillion examples in my own life. I could, without naming anyone in my family, point to other examples that I grew up when, again, seemed normal in the family growing up, even though I knew even then watching it going like this is like extreme. Because I would notice when I looked at other people's families, like it didn't seem like that pattern. So I later came to find out that, oh, this is an ADHD thing. There's a kind of inconsistency that doesn't make sense. So maybe you like start strong with something and they're really motivated and you're consistent for a period, but like the long-term consistency with things is very, very difficult. It's almost like it's so boring that it's hard. There's cycles of really intense focus and then followed by complete exhaustion or like shutdown. It's this dysregulated system that is very common with the ADHD profile. And then like on a feeling level, and again, I know this can be attributed to a lot of different people, but just as part of this discussion, there's like this lifelong feeling. And this is what makes me feel so sad for these women who are just now recognizing it. And that may be you. But it's this feeling like you should be able to do more than you are. And I think when we have that thought, that feeling of disappointment in ourselves all the time, it degrades, our sense of self-worth when we don't understand what's happening and we can't validate it for ourselves, which again, I'm very grateful I've had that narrative for myself, because while it still may be frustrating, I just recognize, I function a little differently than other people. And that's just the truth of it. I don't need to beat up myself about it. That's not to say that I didn't in the past, but at this point in my life, it's just, it's acceptance. We all have to just accept how we're wired. The important part to know about this is it's not that you can't function. I mean, obviously, amazing, amazing things have been done in the world through individuals with ADHD. Amazing. I mean, I would argue some of the most amazing things that have happened and been invented and discovered have most likely been by an individual with ADHD. So it's not that you can't function, but it's this sense of like you've been functioning, and the way you've been functioning, especially if you're a gifted woman on top of it, or a high function, like you have this high expectation for yourself, it requires an enormous amount of effort, mental, psychological energy and effort behind the scenes. There's also something else happening here that I think isn't talked about enough. And again, I won't go into all the details here, but I want to touch on it. I'm going to be doing more episodes on this topic because there's just so many things to say about it. But research shows that children with higher cognitive ability, so very bright, very capable, highly intelligent children, are actually less likely to be identified early, boys and girls, even when they have clear ADHD traits. So why is this? It probably makes some intuitive sense if you think about it. When you have high intellectual ability, you are more likely to be able to compensate for the weaknesses, at least to a certain point. Like I said, especially young, young and early childhood into elementary school, sometimes clear and through high school. I mean, I kind of academically, at least, was able to figure out a way I came up with my system that allowed me to get good grades. So there's more there to unpack, but these kids can get good grades. They can compensate. They can figure things out quickly. They can figure out like a way around. Maybe other people do it one way, but they can pull it together. Like I pulled it together. Now, how many last minute all-nighters did I pull in all of my years as a student? More than I care to mention. And I'm not proud of them, but there was this little part of me that was like, I was able to do it. I would delay and delay and procrastinate and procrastinate. And this is a very ADHD thing, because it was like I needed the stress of the moment to know, oh, I've got to get this done tomorrow, even though I've had like weeks to work on it. This happened in graduate school too. I mean, again, I am by no means proud to say this is the way I have functioned. I feel like I've really shifted and had to work really hard to try not to function this way in my adult life, my later adult life. But even in graduate school, I could quote unquote get away with this weird way of working where all of my peers were consistently working on their master's thesis like all year long. And I did not do that. How did I do it? I wrote it all in like a week. I like sat down, I hyper focused, and I just did it. And part of me being effective in that is because I had the added stress of like, I have to have this done. I mean, I don't like to do things like that now. But my point is, highly intelligent kids with very clear ADHD traits, they sometimes don't get diagnosed at all because their intelligence can easily mask the ADHD piece. Now, that's not always the case, but oftentimes. So they're not seen as struggling. They're seen as capable, right? And interestingly, research also shows that intellectually gifted individuals are actually overrepresented in ADHD populations. So it's interesting. So there's this overlap between high intelligence and ADHD that is more common than I think most people realize. And because of that same intelligence, it often goes unrecognized, the ADHD piece. And over time, especially for women, we develop what I call, or what others have called, like this high functioning mask. So we become highly responsible and perfectionistic and very good at managing the expectations. We've figured out, it's like we've had a lifetime and through our childhood to figure out ways to compensate. And sometimes we even use anxiety and like that procrastination and then the adrenaline hit, right, to like stay on top of those things, because that's what helps our brain initiate the task and execute. It is a whole thing. So the very traits that help a gifted, highly intelligent person succeed when they have ADHD are the same ones that keep them from being fully understood. So why are so many women only realizing this now? It's so upsetting to me. And part of it, like I said, it is just increased awareness. So for better, for worse, I have sort of this, I want to say love-hate with social media, but it's probably more hate at this point. But, you know, social media can distribute more information. There's just this flood of information and conversations. And I would say people sharing things in a way that they probably wouldn't have decades ago because there was a stigma. So there's less stigma, more people are sharing, more people are being vulnerable, which is awesome. But I think there's also something developmental happening. And many other people have talked about this. I'm definitely not the only one talking about this. And as a woman in midlife, I can see this again in my life and other women around me. As life becomes more complex, so you've got your career, you're at a certain stage of your career, you've got your relationships, your marriage, your motherhood, which is a big piece of the pie, just the mental load of daily life. Life becomes more complex, and just like that adolescent girl who's like moving from like 5th grade, 6th grade to 7th grade, the systems, interestingly, same hormonal, right? Like hormonal disruptions right around these times. All the systems that used to hold everything together, or that could hold it together, at least like enough, start to break down. And like I said, in childhood, boys are diagnosed with ADHD far more often than girls. But by adulthood, those rates begin to even out, which tells us something significant. These women were always there. They were just missed. In fact, some estimates suggest that a large percentage of girls with ADHD were never diagnosed at all. So when women begin recognizing this now in their 30s or 40s or even 50s, it's not random, unfortunately. It's just we're starting to catch up with all the girls who were missed. So I want to end this today. Like I said, we're going to talk more about it. And I would love to hear your questions, your reflections, your personal stories on this, because I think there are many of us who can identify with this. And I'm sure I'm not the only one. I hope I'm not the only one whose algorithm is flooding me with all of this content about women, especially midlife women, getting diagnosed with ADHD. So whether or not you have a formal diagnosis, that's not something I'm here to determine at all. But I am interested in helping you understand your patterns more clearly. Because for many women, it's not just about a diagnosis. And you may, even if you have it, you may be like me and you're like, I don't really feel like I need to go get officially diagnosed unless you have some. For kids, it's helpful because they can get different accommodations and things in school. So it's really helpful. And of course, from a treatment standpoint, when you're younger and even when you're older, it can be very helpful if that is the path that you want to take. But I want to talk about just the narrative, the self-narrative, the identity issues, because there's this piece about realizing the way I've been trying to function isn't actually aligned with how I'm wired. And whether we're talking about giftedness or whether we're talking about ADHD or other forms of neurodivergence, that realization in itself can be incredibly relieving. Incredibly. So in the next episode, I want to go a layer deeper into this issue, especially the connection between ADHD and high intelligence and why that can be confusing. And we're going to talk about twice exceptionality, which ADHD is just one type of that. But I don't think I've done a deep dive yet on this podcast when it comes to twice exceptionality. So we're going to talk about it. And if you want to learn more, make sure you hit follow if you haven't yet on this podcast so that every time a new release comes out, you will automatically get it. That makes it super easy. And I just want to encourage you. If you've ever felt like I'm capable or I feel relatively capable, but I'm so inconsistent, or I understand things really deeply and I like complex things, but I struggle to follow through, or I struggle to do basic things, there's probably more to the story. So for now, just notice what came up for you in this episode, what resonated. And sometimes understanding truly is the first real form of relief. And if you would like to stay in touch with me, I would love to invite you, if you haven't yet, to join my weekly newsletter. I call it the Sanctuary Letters. And in addition to reminding you every time this podcast comes out, I usually am sharing things just behind the scenes. What's happening in my life? What is coming up for me? Just my reflections on various things. Sometimes I also drop in specific things that I'm loving at the moment. It's just a more personal way to stay connected to me than through social media, although you can always come and say hello to me on Instagram. But if you haven't, please join the newsletter. I would love to have you on there. That helps me just know who you are in the audience. And I'm always inviting people to reply. So if you are on my email, please reply every once in a while. It's so lovely. I love hearing from people. I do. And people do email me, and it is so, so enlightening to hear what things are resonating with you. And it gives me ideas for this. So I just wanted to invite you to do that. Until next week, I can't wait to dive into this topic more. Keep flourishing. Thank you for listening to the Power to Flourish podcast. I hope today's conversation left you feeling more seen, more supported, and more deeply connected to yourself. And if this episode resonated, would you take a moment to subscribe, leave a review, or share it with a friend? It's one of the best ways to help this work reach the women who need it most. You'll find show notes, links, and resources from today's episode at powertoflourish.com. And now just a quick reminder, this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. It's not therapy, medical advice, or a substitute for professional support. And listening doesn't make me your therapist or doctor, though if you're looking for a coach, you know where to find me. All right, beautiful one, that's it for now. Until next time, trust yourself, honor your gifts, and keep flourishing.